Sophia spent the entire weekend trying to shake the conversation from her mind. She went for a long walk through the city, letting the cold autumn air sting her cheeks, hoping it would clear her thoughts. She threw herself into grading papers, reading, even cooking, anything to keep herself busy. But no matter how much she tried, Daniel's words followed her. "This isn't just in my head, is it?" She knew the answer, and that terrified her. By Monday morning, she was determined to set things right. She arrived at the university early, giving herself time to breathe, to remind herself of the line she could not cross. She told herself she would act normal, keep her distance, and move past whatever it was that had started to take hold of her. But then class started, and he walked in. Daniel looked the same, calm, collected, carrying that same quiet confidence that had drawn her in from the beginning. But when he sat down, he didn't look away. He held her gaze for just a second longer than necessary, as if daring her to acknowledge what was between them. She looked away first. The lecture went on as usual, but she felt him there in every moment. His presence was like an invisible force, pulling at her, making it impossible to focus the way she usually did. Every time she asked the class a question, it was his voice that answered, rich and thoughtful. And every time she responded, she felt the undercurrent of something unspoken between them. When class ended, she hurried to gather her things, hoping to escape before he could linger again. But as she turned to leave, she heard his voice behind her. "Professor Sinclair." She froze. He never called her that. Not like the other students. He always said Sophia when they were alone. She turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes?" His lips curved slightly, but his eyes held something else, something unreadable. "Do you have a moment?" She hesitated. This was a mistake. She knew it, but she nodded anyway. He gestured toward the empty rows of desks, waiting until the last few students had filtered out. Then he spoke. "I don't want to make things difficult for you," he said carefully. "But I also don't want to pretend this doesn't exist." Sophia let out a slow breath. "Daniel, I know." He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost frustrated with himself. "I know this is complicated. I know there are rules, and I respect them. But I also know that you feel it too." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "This isn't fair to either of us," she said softly. "I am your professor. For one more semester." His voice was quiet, measured. "And then what?" She didn't have an answer for that. "Tell me you haven't thought about it," he murmured, "and I'll leave it alone." Sophia swallowed hard. He was giving her an out, a way to put an end to this before it went too far. But she couldn't lie to him. She had thought about it, too many times. When he sighed and started to turn away, she surprised herself by reaching out, her fingers just barely brushing his wrist. The touch was fleeting, barely anything at all. But it was enough. Enough for him to pause. Enough for him to look back at her. She pulled her hand away quickly, stepping back as if she had touched fire. "We can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Daniel studied her for a long moment, and then, to her surprise, he smiled. "I'll wait." Sophia's breath caught. "Daniel, I don't expect anything," he said, "but I won't pretend, not with you." And with that, he turned and left, leaving her standing in the empty classroom, her heart racing and her mind spinning. The weeks that followed were torture. She tried to act normal, to treat him the same as any other student, but it was impossible, because now there was an awareness between them, a silent pull in every glance, every exchange, every moment of passing too close in the hallway. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was only her who felt this way, until the night of the department gala. Sophia never cared much for academic functions, but as a faculty member, attendance was expected. She arrived in an elegant navy dress, her hair styled loosely around her shoulders, and spent most of the evening making polite conversation with colleagues. And then she saw him. Daniel wasn't supposed to be there, but he was, standing across the room, looking effortlessly handsome in a dark suit, holding a glass of wine as he spoke to someone she didn't recognize. For a moment, she could only stare. Then, as if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met, and the rest of the room faded. Daniel excused himself from his conversation and, to her complete horror and anticipation, started walking toward her. She turned quickly, heading for the terrace, needing air. But before she could step outside, she felt him behind her. Sophia. His voice was softer this time, just for her. She exhaled shakily and turned to face him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He arched a brow. "Why not?" "You know why." He took a slow step closer. "I wanted to see you." The words sent a shiver down her spine. "This is dangerous," she whispered. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then took her hand, lightly, carefully, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. For the first time, she let herself feel it, the warmth of his skin, the way her heart pounded at the nearness of him, the way her body leaned just slightly toward his. "I don't care about the rules," he murmured. "I care about you." It was the way he said it that undid her. The sincerity, the quiet intensity. "We can't," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Daniel's lips curved slightly. Not smug, not victorious, just understanding. "I told you," he murmured. "I'll wait." And as he stepped away, disappearing back into the crowd, Sophia knew the inevitable had only just begun.